everyone. A reminder for everyone to please turn your phones off. Also, during this session, you'll be receiving an email from Develop asking you to rate this session. Please make sure that you do take 5 minutes to do that, as it helps Develop improve the content for the years to come. Hi, I'm Cinzia. My pronouns are she, they. I am co-CEO at Code Coven and an equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant. I joined the games industry 6 years ago, more or less, working on the game making side of things. And over time, I jumped into working on diversity, equity, and inclusion, eventually becoming the first person to do by marginalizing them rather than on the numbers. For example, marginalized ethnicities, so people of color, are not a minority overall in the world. They are, in fact, the global majority. However, they are marginalized, especially in the Western world. And this is the same for marginalized genders. Women are not a minority. They are, in fact, 51% of people in the UK, but they are marginalized. So by using the word marginalized, by using marginalized gender specifically, we also include and acknowledge people who are women, but whose sexualization, just trans people, trans women, non-binary people, agender people, gender fluid people, and any other gender non-conforming people that don't fit under the umbrella of all the terms that I mentioned. And while Code Coven focuses on marginalized genders, it's important to acknowledge intersectionality. So things will impact different marginalized people differently based on circumstances, identity, etc. For example, a woman is going to be subject to a lot more discrimination than a cis white woman. They are both marginalized and their experience cannot be dismissed as a result of it. But intersectionality is the understanding and acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination, oppression, and privilege, and that we must consider all the different ways people are marginalized and privileged and how they can impact some people more than others. This, again, doesn't mean that we should invalidate people who have more privilege for their suffering. It just means that we need to acknowledge our own privilege and how we can help people around us. So before we go ahead, I do want to let people know that some content warning, there will be mention of harassment, threats of violence against marginalized people, discriminatory behavior, sexual assault. If any of this becomes too much for anyone here, you will not be judged if you decide to walk away for a little bit. It's completely fine. Like, if it just gets too much, just take a step back, take a breather, and then you can come back in and enjoy. At the time, most studios stayed silent, and the one who did speak couldn't denounce the way marginalized people were being treated. This lack of accountability towards our games communities and how games flourish and is throwing marginalized people. The which to many people accept Speaking up about the bad treatment in the industry. At the time, this looked like the start of change in the industry. We all started talking about it and everything was going to get better. But how many times people keep talking about it. It shows that while awareness is becoming more prominent, people continue to gloss over the impact of marginalized people. What I wanted to show you here is some slides, some headlines that we've seen in the last and equity and inclusion as a tick box exercise. That once you've done the thing, you've brought the one woman, then you've fixed it for everyone, right? I mean, and it shows that we're like doing the bare minimum is seen as amazing and great and something that should be shouted about. The obvious thing is that this showcase would have still have had a massive diversity issue if that one woman would have showed up. Like you wouldn't have fixed it by having one woman there, and it would have still been massively underrepresented. And the industry remains far and wide unsafe for marginalized people. At a recent Games conference, not this one, there were widespread reports of marginalized people being drugged or people attempting to coax them into hotel rooms. We've been distributing drinks cover to every one of marginalized genders through the conference, with the idea of giving them something to empower them to keep themselves safe. And the face and the relief we've been giving those to people just shows how widespread that concern is throughout the history, that it was a moment, oh, I have something to keep myself safe. And that is not how it should be. And not only that, but the ever-frequent studios or people in the games industry that have been exposed for inappropriate or discriminatory behavior shows that overall, while we are making progress, we do tend to lose sight of the important part of this and why we should be putting in this work. The important thing is that everyone deserves to be safe, no matter who they are. We cannot leave anyone behind. And we can keep having this conversation. We can keep about how we're going to advance the industry and how it's important for studios and the business case and how it's going to make, a studio more innovative and great. But if we're not talking about the endpoint, which is it's going to make marginalized people safe, we are forgetting why we should be doing this. So how do we commit to systemic change? The first thing, and the important one, is becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable. The real journey towards equity, diversity, and inclusion is not always going to be paved with easy wins. Sometimes you're going to have difficult and uncomfortable conversations. Getting yourself comfortable with this is important to be able to embrace those conversations rather than shying away. You must become comfortable with the uncomfortable. It's not going to be easy or comfortable to make systemic changes, and you're going to have to confront and unlearn the systems of privilege you have in place. It has to happen to move forward. So another thing that you can do is creating an open space where people can raise uncomfortable problems and learn to accept this feedback without defensiveness, no matter how unfair it could seem. Remember, it is not your employees' job to fix those problems for you. It is the role of senior leadership to fix any systemic issues you have at your studio. It's important in the UK because any employees, no matter how small, it doesn't matter the size, has duty of care to their employees. I mean, you have to look after your employees. That is a legal requirement. And not only that, but the Equality Acts of 2010 tells us that we need to actively, and that's a keyword, actively, make steps towards making every company free of harassment and discrimination. It's a legal requirement, and if you are not putting in the work, you are not respecting your obligation as an employee. So give people a chance to raise those concerns to you. Do not take it defensively. And create a space where they can raise those concerns without fear of retribution. And that is going to be so key to get you to move forward. Because if you're not hearing from your employees, if you're not hearing from the people that are going to be experiencing those problems, how are you going to know what's actually happening? One of the biggest blockers and the hardest thing by far to be doing to make your studio safe is where you have to make the hardest decisions. Sometimes, to get your workplace to be safe, you will need to remove people. And sometimes those people are going to be very senior. That's the reality of it. Equity, diversity, and inclusion is incompatible with knowingly keeping or hiring toxic people. If the marginalized people at your studio spend time trying to tell you someone you're looking at hiring is going to be toxic, believe them. It is not worth the risk to the well-being of your marginalized employees. Do not keep these people. Do not hire these people. If someone is consistently being reported on for toxic behavior, take it seriously and remove them. Yes, it means that you might have to rehire very senior people at a time that's inconvenient to you. But the risk of keeping them is greater. A positive studio culture can be very easy to implement, but it is so much easier to break it and break the trust from your employees. And coming back from broken trust is so much more difficult than it is to rehire a senior staff. So do the work before it becomes too late. Do not wait until the end. Do not wait until things have gone too far. Then look at the glass ceiling at your studios. The glass ceiling is the idea of there is, especially for marginalized people, a space at which you stop, a space at which people can no longer get promoted. And we call that the glass ceiling because you can see what's above you, but you can't reach it. It's completely transparent, but you just can't get there. So where is that glass ceiling? What is preventing marginalized people from being included? Where are marginalized people consistently not being promoted? How are opportunities that will lead to growth and advancement distributed? It's very difficult to track opportunities, but it is where all of that growth happens. Look at the data across the studio and figure out where people are left behind. Investigate why that is, take immediate action about it. And again, it's not going to be easy because you are dealing with systemic issues. But if you put that work effectively and make changes across your studio, you will end up a richer, more open studios for everyone with more opportunities for you to innovate. Then review your studio processes and policies. Can your benefits be more inclusive? Are your processes keeping everyone in mind? Are people able to be themselves without fear of retribution? Are people happy with the policies and benefits at your studios? Where is your gender pay gap? Where is your race pay gap? We have talked in the UK about the gender pay gap as it's a legal requirement for a lot of people, but the race pay gap is completely ignored, and it is a thing as much as the gender pay gap is. Spend time making sure that your studio is inclusive for everyone at all levels. It's not only great for innovation, as we talked about, but also for hiring and retention. A studio that is inclusive and talks about it will have people more likely to stick around for the long term. But everyone at all levels as well, when it comes to hiring, has started catching on that a studio that cares about diversity and inclusion is a studio that cares about its people. And so you're going to be treated well, and you're less likely to be asked to crunch or to just be treated poorly in general. And so everyone is going to want to go for those studios that are actually putting in that work. But so this is something I'm here to tell you a little bit more about. We can help you at Code Coven with figuring all of that out. And so I'm introducing Evolve, the studio accreditation, in partnerships with gamesindustry.biz. Evolve is a brand new program where we're going to try and let you understand how you can improve your studio when it comes to diversity and inclusion. This is an accreditation, so something that you will have to get accredited for, that will ask you and your employees questions on equity, diversity, and inclusion. For employers, you'll get questions such as your representation, your policies, how you support everyone across the studio. And then for the employees, there will be questions around how to perceive your work, how to perceive what you're doing at the studio, how important EDI is to them, whether they're safe from those discriminatory and harassment behavior. Over time, we'll be able to create a benchmark for the industry globally, because we are doing this around the world. And this will create a benchmark around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we'll share this with every partner studio to help you understand where you can grow and where you're leading the way. What are the things that you could be doing better? What are the things that you need to be working on? It's important to note that with Evolve, we are not looking to reward the bare minimum. We are not going to do the accreditation for people that are legal, that are just respecting the law. That is not what this is about. We want to keep at the forefront of this whole conversation marginalized people in mind. This is about making sure that we can have marginalized people in places where they are not going to be set up for failure. So you are going to have to answer difficult questions, and we will ask a lot of questions from you and from your employees. And this is purposeful. If you're going to be put forward as a change maker and a thought leader, which is an extremely exciting thing to happen to you, we want to see the work being done for everyone at your studio at all levels. This accreditation is done again with marginalized people in mind. And while we want to acknowledge and celebrate the great studios that are putting in the work, that are doing it, It's particularly important to ensure that it won't be done by compromising on the safety of marginalized people across the industry. And on that note, we're proud to announce that Eastside Game is our first studio to be accredited. Eastside Games is a 200 people studio that does mobile games. They've done RuPaul's Drag Race Superstars, and they do games for a few franchises such as Star Trek, The Office, Funko Pop, and Archer. They do a bunch. And they've gone through the process for the past few months with us. We're extremely proud of where they are as a studio. A lot of the data that I wish I could share with all of you, but I have to keep some privacy. But a lot of the data that you shared with us just showed just how far things can actually go when people invest in diversity and inclusion. The expectations that we had for that pilot studio were extremely high. They were going to be much, much higher than we're going to have for the rest of the studios because they needed to be the example. We wanted someone that we were going to put at the forefront. And we're so happy that they met every single one of them. They are absolutely leading the way in this, and I hope that you start looking at what they're doing in the future because we can all be doing more like Eastside Games when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So, the benefits in all of this, thanks to our partnerships with gamesindustry.biz, the Evolve accreditation will have a tag on the GIBiz jobs portal, meaning that every accredited studio will not only be highlighted, but it will be specifically searchable. So it will result in more people applying for jobs at your company, particularly marginalized people. And this accreditation highlights that you are a studio worth investing their time into, and it will give you an opportunity to be at the forefront of the decision-making for candidates. They will see you first. Alongside the jobs portal, we are working on many more collaborations with GIBiz, meaning that you will be highlighted as the change maker that you are by doing Evolve accreditation. And that's not all, of course. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a journey, and every studio will have more to do. You're not gonna just get the accreditation and get to tick the box and walk away in the sunshine, relaxing. You've solved all the problems of discrimination. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So if you attempt to do the accreditation, regardless of whether or not you get the badge of honor, you will get a full report, which will compare with how other studios did and give you that idea again of where you can do better and where you are leading the way. But it will also, it will give you like all the results from everything that your employee thought and what they think the priority is. But we'll also give you a list of advice next steps, giving you a chance to work and prioritize the work that needs doing, and helping you understand what is the most important priorities to your employees at your studios. Those next steps are balanced. You'll be getting a chance to see where some of your easy wins are. So, what can you do that is lower effort but high impact, as well as those longer term change that will require the hard work. This will give you a chance to celebrate your wins while continuing to do the long-term work so that you don't lose sight of what's behind it, which is helping marginalized people, or just lose motivation from having to do all the hard work. And importantly, by you joining along and getting yourself to go through the accreditation process, you'll help the industry as a whole. You are putting yourself through the lens of accountability, which is scary, but it is so important. And you can get the studios who would shy away from this on board. The more studios we get on board, the more people will get the pressure to join along. So if you decide to be part of that first wave, you will shape what it will look like in the future. And if we all get together and do this together as an industry, we can genuinely make a change in the industry. We can make things better. And something that I really want to point on is that it will not only impact the industry, because it's great to improve our little circle of an industry, but what you can do is make a change in society overall. We have a unique position in games where we give people the opportunity to walk through someone else's life for a few hours. You're literally handing someone with the controller or the keyboard and mouse the ability to walk through someone else's shoes. So if you take that responsibility seriously, if you put in that work, you can make a difference for everyone everywhere. You can create more empathy for marginalized people by telling those unique stories. we can all change the society overall for the better. And this is a responsibility and an opportunity that we have in the games industry that is completely unique to other industries and other entertainment industries as well. Because telling a story through film is not going to have the same impact as someone actually walking through someone else's shoes. So you have an opportunity here to not only change your studios, change the industry, but change society overall for the better. And that starts with investing your time in your marginalized people at your studios. So, can I get through questions? If you'd like to ask more about Evolve, there is or details over there. Feel free to get in touch. But we've got time for questions now. Was I that clear? Yeah, go ahead. You're going to get a microphone.
Thank you. My question is is Evolve open to any studio? Our studio is very small. We have only 6 people, which, how is the accreditation going to work when we only have 6 people, mostly obviously senior team because we are that small. So yeah, because you mentioned a lot of criteria, and it's difficult for a small studio like us who we don't have many metrics to go by, basically. So is it just open to everyone, any studio, regardless of size?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that if you are a small studio that's just starting up, it gives you a unique opportunity to do it from the get-go. Like if you're doing it this early on and you understand this early on where you need to prioritize things, you can make a much bigger difference as you're growing your culture. So that gives you a really unique opportunity to do it before things potentially become a problem, like you're getting it this early on. Because the way the questions have been formulated very much have been made in a way that the questions themselves end up being a to-do list, because they go through asking you about your policies and specific questions on policies and everything. And so as you're going through them, you kind of be able to take note of the policies that you might be missing or where you could be working and kind of getting better on. So it gives you a really unique opportunity to do it early. Obviously, with different size studios, we're going to have different expectations. We're not going to be expecting you with a 6-people studio to have all the policies perfectly set in place where you're just starting up. But it gives you that really unique opportunity to just do it from the beginning. Thank you very much. Yeah, no worries. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thank you.
So I just have a question. I work in games education. If you yourself are not senior management or in a senior leadership position, and obviously so much starts in education.
Mm-hmm.
We are educating the future game developers, and some are older and already freelancing, so they're already kind of in the industry. So I guess it's a very difficult to answer question, also a very broad question. But as one person within a community that isn't 100% on board with supporting marginalized people, what would your advice be in terms of convincing people that this is crucial?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to say, and that's something that I do repeat every time I get that question, is you don't have to do it. It is not your responsibility as a marginalized person to bear the weight of all marginalized people and to do all that emotional labor, because it's tiring work. I do it full time and I'm tired. So doing it on the side of your main job is very, very tiring. And that's how I started. I started doing it on the side of my job and I ended up burnt out. That's the reality of it. So that's the very important thing to say. But so what I find really works with senior people that don't quite understand is to bring in the data, to bring in the numbers, to kind of talk about how much of a difference it makes when people invest in diversity and inclusion in terms of money and in terms of like making a difference in like the success of a studio, etc. Those are things that tend to really compel senior people that wouldn't normally care about it. There is so much data out there. So it's about kind of like, you know, putting everything together and just being like, here, like there's so much research done on this. It actually is something that we need to be investing on. And then the other thing that I would advise is to try and kind of like figure out the studios that are doing the work, that are like talking about it, and hopefully this will help you, and get to a point where you collaborate with them and you get them to come and speak at your university and speak to the leaders at your university or like education place, so that they talk about how important it is to invest in it and have people in positions of authority saying those words. So you don't have to do it. And you know, if you, and you will, but if you can get people that are allies rather than marginalized people talking about it, then it comes from a place of selflessness, which is a lot easier for people to digest than when you're talking about yourself. So yeah, but first and foremost, you don't have to do that work.
Yeah, what you say about doing it on the side, that like speaks so true to me, because
Yeah.
I'm the community manager, but as my like side job, I'm the ethics coordinator, and it actually, that's what I feel most passionate about, but it's the piece that is the most difficult to actually see the change that you want to do, and that piece can be sometimes demotivating, I think.
And it happens a lot that marginalized people are relegated to being the representative of everyone and to be the person at the studio that does that job for free when people study and go to uni and everything for this. And so, but because you're marginalized and you have lived experience, therefore you should be able to talk about it, right? It doesn't make you an expert either. And so you end up having to do so much research in order to be able to, you know, do this subject justice. That's not fair, because that takes you away from your actual day job and the thing that will help you progress. But also, when you're doing that on the side of your job, when it's not in your responsibilities, then there's no real, like, you don't have any power to hold people accountable. Like there is nothing in your job description that allows you to go to senior leadership and say, okay, we have to do this because I am the authority and I'm telling you this is like the important thing to do. So you're being put in a position where you're likely to fail at this because you're not being given any real responsibility or accountability. Like it all ends up being kind of like fake responsibilities to do that work.
Thank you so much. I don't want to take too much of time away from other valid questions, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Hello, it's just more of a clarification, I guess, on the word studio. Is it for game development studios or also publishing studios?
Anyone in the industry. We were speaking with organizations that do the work of diversity and inclusion in the industry and were interested in joining along as well. So it is very industry specific because that's the space that we understand at Code Coven, but it is open to anyone in the industry, and arguably like publishers have the chance to bring more people aboard and to, you know, get them to then follow on. So it would be massive to have publishers joining along for this.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. I think you made a really good point earlier about during Gamergate, like the silence of studios was kind of an abandonment of marginalized people. Do you have, sorry to put you on the spot, but do you feel like you have any thoughts about how studios could have stood up for us in a way that isn't just like kicking the hornet's nest and potentially, you know, making us more of a target?
Yeah, so do you mean like how do studios hold their communities accountable?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think that it is so important for people to take that responsibility seriously. If you've got online games, if you have like Discord communities, etc., just being really strict on your moderation and just ban people. But also like hold people accountable in your community. If you see those kind of, you know, inexcusable behaviors, talk about it publicly. Make sure that you are like you're, you know, as a studio saying that you don't accept this, that you don't condone this, that you will remove people that behave in that way, and then actually do it. It might feel a bit scary at first because you might have people that like want to move away from your game, but in the long term, you will massively benefit from this. So it is well worth doing, but it's about being really strict with how you do moderation and how you kind of like accept that behavior, because it's very easy to just be like, oh no, it's just our community, that's how they are, that's just gamers. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have let it be that way. In reality, we've done this as an industry by not holding people accountable when we needed to. So yeah, just like have a hard stop and stick to it.
Yeah, great point. I think, yeah, it's really difficult, right? Because it just feels like the people that we advertise games to are so toxic already that it feels quite an uphill battle. But yeah, I guess we have to start somewhere.
You will get a bit of an uproar at first, but you will find, and I don't have the data on me, but I think it was something like 80% of people who play games, it was 80%, that was from GIBiz as well, that data. 80% of people who play games are more likely to play games from studios that do corporate social responsibility. So that do like charity work and that are care about making sure that the studio is green and making sure that it's inclusive for everyone. So it sounds, because social media is a thing where people just see the negative because that's what social medias want you to see. So you stay on the platform longer. I'm not going to go to that subject. But so you're more likely to see those loud negative comments that are telling you that this is what your community looks like. But it's very, very likely that the majority of your community will be a lot better off by not having those people around.
Yeah, seems like you're optimistic, which is really nice. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm data-driven, not optimistic.
Hi, so first of all, this is super exciting. I'm very happy that this exists and it's coming to be, and I really hope it's going to be taken up. I'm curious because when we talk about diversity, there's obviously a lot of groups within that we want to increase representation of. Is your recommendations, are they going to be broken down by different sections such as underrepresented genders, ethnicity, LGBTQ+? And do you have like an overview of the categories you're trying to give recommendations for, or is it more measuring the overall inclusivity and feel of the studio, if that makes sense?
Yeah, a lot of advice is going to be applicable for everyone because it's going to be general advice on making a studio inclusive. But what we're doing is that we are asking specific questions on different categories so that we can give specific advice. So if a studio is doing great on representation but is not as accessible as it could be, then we're going to be giving specific advice on accessibility and making sure that we bring the people on board that can give that advice effectively. So it will be on a case-by-case basis, but overall, a lot of the advice is just going to be applicable to everyone. Because in reality, the advice that we give on accessibility, for example, they're going to make the studio better for everyone. So we try to look at it from a lens of intersectionality rather than picking and choosing people.
Hiya.
Hi.
Great chat, by the way.
Thank
awesome.
you.
So I recently moved into a game dev studio. I was on publishing side before, and I wasn't as visible on social media. And something that I wasn't really prepared for was how personally targeted I would feel with my studio being targeted. I wasn't prepared for this, really. I have experience in well-being and mental health and managing myself in that way, but it still shook me. Do you feel like it's the responsibility of studios these days to make sure that their people are prepared to manage that? So not only, like you said, with community management and ensuring that you have strict moderation, but on places that are harder to moderate and harder to protect your employees, do you feel like that's something that studios should take on with educating their people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like strong social media policies, for example, is something that that can help and go a long way to like spend time in that social media policy to not like, because a lot of the time we use social media policies as being a way of like, just say that you're not associated with the studio, like your opinions are your own, blah, blah. But if you use that social media policy to actually tell people how to disconnect, how to, like do social media mindfully, etc., that is somewhere that can make things a lot better. And then the other side of things, I think, is on the moderation of that social media. It's going to be very difficult, but to make sure that you keep that as well as possible, kind of like managed. But like for like people that do social media, to make sure that when it does, like when backlash happens, that it doesn't end up being seen by everyone at the studio and doesn't end up impacting people's well-being. So there's things that we can do, like reporting the comments and like hiding them and making sure that you don't interact with those negative comments, because it's very tempting to interact, and so you kind of like get a nice like headline-y piece to say like, oh, you've slapped back at the haters. But what you do when you do that is that you just spend more time highlighting what negative people are saying, because you're putting them at the forefront. So it's about shutting all of that down in a way that is not going to be seen by everyone, but more just removing it from existence.
Thank you.
We got anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, sorry, I was trying to formulate this on my phone to get the words phrased better, but we'll go for it. I like the talk, by the way.
Thank you.
Something I think that was like really I wanted to ask about, because you've a lot of mentions about like DEI when it comes to EDI when it comes to like hiring and those kind of decisions. And I think in the current state of the industry, that also I was like wondering if you have, as part of the Evolve program, the difficult conversation with studios about thinking about EDI when it comes to if you need to let people go, and about, because I know there are certain companies I'm familiar with, which when it came to like letting people go, if maybe they let go 8% of the workforce, that 8% of the workforce resulted in a third of the trans employees going, because they were working typically in sectors which were like a much more at risk within the company. And so it was about like, I was wondering if you have any, like, when you're doing this accreditation, if you have any feedback for companies in that, or studios in those areas.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what we're planning on doing. This is the idea, is that because we're going to be getting comments that are anonymized from people working at the studio. So there is like a few open text questions that are there for people to raise concerns, to let us know about specific things that might have happened, or things that the studio needs to address that would not potentially be addressed in another way. So we're going to tell people about these things, and we're going to tell people exactly what they need to be addressing. So it's very much the point, is to bring that accountability, to be the external people, to tell them where they need to do better. And we are going to have those difficult conversations, and we want to hold people accountable. And obviously, I'm not going to work for those studios. I'm not going to go to them and just see that they're doing the work, right? It's about like getting them to do it and getting everyone to join along. With the idea that we're encouraging people to try and do the survey yearly, so that they keep an eye on how things are going. But yeah, so we're going to have those difficult conversations, and we're going to tell people this is what you need to do, because if people are joining and doing this, it's that they want to hear that feedback. So it's important that we don't just sugarcoat everything and say, no, everything's fine, you're great, when the data that we're getting is the complete opposite. Nice.
Hi, yes.
Hi.
I think it was a really cool talk. I just wanted to ask about some of the incentives.
I can't hear you.
Oh, is this any better?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, just saying I really enjoyed the talk. And when it comes down to like incentives for studios that may want to improve themselves, but maybe struggling in different areas, if it's about when it comes down to areas of social media and things like that, that you would how would you incentivize different studios to be a part of the initiative?
Yeah, so the incentive is that you get to be seen as a leader on this, and that you get to be found when people are applying for jobs as the leader on this. The other incentive is that you're actually looking after your staff. So I think the whole idea with this is to have some incentive and to encourage people to apply, to be seen as the leaders in that space. But I think we're past the idea of just giving people a lot of stuff for doing the bare minimum.
Yes.
And that very much is not what this is. It's not going to be something that's like, here, well done. You care about diversity and inclusion, but you've done none of the work. Because that's how historically we have done a lot of those initiatives to try and get studios on board without thinking about the people behind them and the marginalized people and how they're being looked after. And so this is about actually getting people to hold themselves accountable. And again, importantly, those incentives are not needed because this is a legal requirement. Not this, obviously, just diversity and inclusion in general is a legal requirement. And this should be an incentive enough that your studio should be legal and you should be respecting the law as far as it goes for an employer.
Cool. Thank you.
We good for questions? All right, thanks everyone. Just don't forget to get in touch.